Mm-hmm.
We have a similar thing with watering days, like certain house numbers can water their lawns on certain days to save water.
Yeah, but what's the goal of the policy?
To conserve water.
To conserve
Water.
water. Okay, does it work?
Yep.
Just put it on at night. No one knows.
Yeah.
I think the policy was just run it.
As in, like, there was one that didn't achieve its purpose.
I can tell you at the moment in child protection in Victoria,
Mm.
there's a real push to get Aboriginal kids in Aboriginal families. And that's been going on for ages. But there simply aren't enough foster families. So they're trying to push this policy, but they don't have resources to implement it. And it's actually putting a lot of stress on all the other organisations because they've been turning to the Aboriginal community first, and there's nothing,
Yeah.
there's no infrastructure to support it. So it's one of these big policies that's been made by the government without any infrastructure to actually support the way that it's going to.
Right, yes.
So that's kind of like something similar.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the first stage in the policy process is that you identify the problem. And to get at the problem, of course, you've got to be mindful of how power is exercised in society. And how a lot of power is behind the scenes. You see, we go on and on about how to prevent people from smoking. You know, governments will say put frightening pictures on the cigarette pack to terrorize the smoker. That every time he picks up the cigarette pack, he sees his innards, burnt up by cancer or something like that, and that will prevent it. No, but the straightforward thing would be to simply ban it, right? To simply say it's such a harmful substance that we just stop its sale and production. No, because there's a lot of powerful influences of the tobacco companies, of farmers who grow tobacco, and political contributions to parties, and so on. So the straightforward solution, which is to say, if it is so harmful, why don't you ban it outright? You don't do that. You say, well, we'll spend money on campaigns to educate the public about the dangers of smoking, and so on. All of that is done. And quite merrily, the tobacco companies then they came up first with a filter, then they came up with, now they've come up with a cigarette which actually doesn't burn at a high temperature. It gets hot enough for you to be able to inhale the nicotine from the tobacco, but it's less tar and less smoke, but it's still, the point about the harm of cigarettes is really nicotine, and in order to get at the nicotine, you take in a whole lot of other chemicals in the smoke, but it's the addictive part is nicotine, and the simple thing is nicotine leaves your bloodstream very quickly, and when it leaves your bloodstream, you will not have the urge to smoke again. But as long as there is nicotine in the bloodstream, it will trigger the brain to tell you, replace the levels of nicotine. Yeah.
But we know that banning substances don't work. Like all the drugs that are illegal, and there are so many of them, people still take them. So banning it isn't like necessarily the only solution. Maybe education will have a better impact in the long run, like telling people it's bad.
Yeah. So, but if you've banned marijuana, as harmful, and still people take them, you could still do the same for tobacco, except that there's a lot of people dependent on the tobacco industry, and it's a powerful industry. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that you can ban opium, because opium is grown in Afghanistan and in Myanmar, and maybe coca is grown in some Bolivia and Guatemala, but it's not the mainstay crop in the United States and in India, right? So not too many people are dependent in the manufacture, but a lot of people are dependent on the manufacture of tobacco. A lot of people in India grow tobacco, and so there's more people who will be affected by a total ban, and therefore you don't do it, right? Because you don't bring it onto the agenda of should we ban or not ban. That's not the question. The question is that it's harmful. Yes, we'll publicize the harm that it does. We'll try to educate the people about it and so on. But for heroin and marijuana is now legal in California. You can use marijuana for recreational purposes, in other words. And marijuana in India is covered under the Narcotic and Psychotropic Substances Act and is actually illegal. But, you mentioned social context, but India recognizes that there are festivals when people, but the general public uses marijuana. So there's a festival that comes up in March called Holi, where people throw color at each other. So in that festival, you make a paste of marijuana and you mix it with a drink with almond paste and sugar and milk called tandai, and this is allowed because even though technically it's illegal, it's a social custom on that day. But if you go to Varanasi, which is a city on the Ganga, which has a temple for Shiva, this is offered as an offering to Shiva every day. And therefore, in Varanasi, you can have marijuana every day, even though technically it will violate the Psychotropic Substances Act, because it's the prasad, it's an offering, holy offering that you give to Shiva.
What would happen if they suddenly started enforcing the law that's there? What would happen if the police suddenly started enforcing the law that is there that everyone's breaking? Would there be an outcry? Would the law be changed, do you think?
If they try to enforce the law, I can't imagine how they might do that, because the number of people involved in who do this is so. The policeman's family will be doing the same thing. So it's not it's not technically you could say yes, and well, if you are a venal politician who wanted to damage your rival politician by locking him up in a crucial phase of your election campaign, you could persuade the police officers to go and say he consumed marijuana in Varanasi, which is the Prime Minister's constituency, actually. You could do that, but that will be exceptional. So it's just that, you must, as lawyers, the law could be used to change social behavior and social norms, but laws that generally get respected and enforced are laws that are consistent with social norms and behavior of people. So if you had norms in, if you had a law that kind of, if you had a law in Australia that surfing is dangerous and is banned, or playing cricket is illegal, you won't be able to enforce it. You won't even think about it, right? So it's so you've got to first identify the problem. You've got to get in there and get a handle on a solution to the problem, and then another stage in public policy again, which is most countries don't do it, which is to consult the public, right? Decision makers think they know best, that they've thought it through, they've consulted the experts. So one of the problems for people is the dominance or the power of the technocracy or the technocrats and experts. They are the ones who think that no. So if you say, for instance, their argument is that we are dealing with very technical and complicated subjects, and the ordinary person on the street is not expected to understand that. So for instance, if the policy, in order to say we will have electricity generated with nuclear reactors, it's a policy, right? You could generate electricity through hydroelectric means, you can generate it by burning coal, you can generate it by solar panels, and you can generate it by the nuclear reactor. So if you have a policy on nuclear reactors, the argument they'd say is, oh, this is such a sophisticated, complex matter that we will go by the advice of the scientists and the experts on whether this should be a water-cooled reactor or if it should be another type of reactor. And so this is not a matter for the public. This is the general assumption. The point is that the public ought to have a say in it. Right? If the public think that nuclear reactors are unsafe and they would rather not want one in their locality, and they very often do, the public protest and say, we don't want a nuclear reactor, not in our backyard. You want a nuclear reactor, go put it somewhere where no people live, but don't put it in our backyard. Now, you've got to respect that. You've got to consult the public, right? But then you have decision-making dilemmas, which is, here is a group that is protesting against a nuclear reactor. They don't want, the nuclear reactor has to be somewhere, and the nuclear reactor is generally more clean than coal-generated electricity. It doesn't emit carbon. It doesn't affect climate change. It's generally very safe. It's a case of a very low risk but high damage. You know, the fact that a nuclear reactor will blow up, the risk of that is quite small. But if it does blow up, the damage that it will cause is very phenomenal. And so you got to make a choice, but I think the public should be consulted on matters like this, and we haven't done very well in any country to consult the public. And very often policies go wrong because they haven't bothered to ask people, about it. I'll give you a simple example. I was once in Bombay, and the railways introduced a fast train between Bombay and Madras, which is mostly used by people who've come from South India and are living in Bombay, whose sort of family relatives are all in the south. And so they are the ones who use the train to go to Madras and then come from Madras to Bombay. And most of them, the very large number of these South Indians, live in a very large slum in Bombay called Dharavi, which is Asia's largest slum. But it's really an amazing place. I don't know how many of you have seen Slumdog Millionaire. Now, it is something of that setting. Slumdog, the Dharavi slum is the inspiration for the shots in that film of slum life. That's how it looks, actually. And so this train was introduced. It cut journey time by 6 hours, and so you get to your destination faster. And the railways found that the train was not filling up. Right? They said, we have introduced a nice super fast train, and other trains, the slower trains still have overbooked and are overcrowded, and this train doesn't have enough passengers. So I was talking to this official who said this, in passing. He didn't think it's a serious problem anyway, he just mentioned it. I said, but have you convened a meeting of people who use the train? And he said, how do you do that? I said, well, that's not very difficult. They're all living in Dharavi, these South Indians who use the trains to go to South India, to go to Madras. Why don't you talk to them? He said, how can I talk to them? How do you do? I said, there is an association of slum dwellers. It's called the National Slum Dwellers Federation. There's an organization, there's a general secretary, there's a president, there are office bearers. That's one you got to contact. And he said, is it actually possible? I said, yeah, it is possible. I'll arrange a meeting. And I arranged a meeting with the National Slum Dwellers Federation and the people in Dharavi. In fact, the National Slum Dwellers Federation General Secretary got the Ramon Magsaysay Prize in the Philippines some years ago for his work in the slum. And so he organized this meeting and they all gathered there. And this man said, I can't understand why this train that ought to be popular is not used by you people. And so they said to him, have you thought about the timing of the train? He said, what do you mean timing of the train? It reaches the destination 6 hours faster than the other trains do. It's a super fast train. They said, listen, your train, your super fast train, reaches Madras City at 9 in the evening. We don't go to Madras City. We go to other places in the state and we need connecting trains. After 9 o'clock, there are no connecting trains. We can't afford to stay in the city, renting a hotel room or something like that. The other slower trains reach the city by 2 o'clock. And after that, we can get some connecting trains, buses to go to where we wish to go. So you change the time of your train and you'll find that it fills up, right? That's simple. Now, no one in the railways had thought about this. They simply thought that the fact that their train was 6 hours faster should make the train attractive. And it's a simple fact that, So you see, consulting people, and getting their view makes for a better policy. If you don't consult people, your policies are likely not to work. I'll give you another example. And as lawyers, you should be interested in this. The city of Bombay decided it will clean up all its pavements of pavement dwellers. City of Bombay has lots of pavement dwellers. That is people who are homeless and they live on the pavement. And they have families on the pavement and, they have a little, they may have a plastic thing that protects them from the rain, but otherwise they've occupied the pavement. They can't be on the road because there are motor vehicles on the road. Now, the pavement is meant for people to walk, not for people to live, right? But then there are lots of them living there. So the municipality decided, no, we have to, under the municipal law, we have an obligation to keep the pavements free for passage of people. So we will evict all these people, these families, and we'll send them out to camps outside of Bombay. We'll put them up in, makeshift camps, where they'll get some water, maybe some electricity, and they'll be protected from the elements, but they can't be on the pavement. So they did this, and so there was a group that went to the court and said that these people shouldn't be evicted. And it's an interesting case because it's a case that again turned on the right to life. The lawyers argued that by putting these people outside the city, you've robbed them of their livelihood because their livelihood is in the middle of the city. Their livelihood is, making keys for locks, repairing watches, repairing umbrellas, cleaning shoes, working as domestic workers in people's homes, being tailors, stitching clothes, being makeshift laundries, ironing clothes. This is their livelihood. And their livelihood depends on where they are. And you take them out of the city and say you've relocated them, you've robbed them of their livelihood, and taking away livelihood from a person is violative of the right to life of the person, because what is left of a right to life if you don't have a livelihood, right? This is the argument that the Supreme Court of India accepted and told Bombay, you can, of course, evict people and keep the pavements free, but you can't relocate these people outside the city. You must relocate them in some places where they can continue with their livelihood, right? So the city had to listen to this directive from the court, and so they came up with a scheme to build tenements, very small flats, but somewhat high-rise, so many of them could be accommodated in a small plot of land, so kind of a high-rise tenement. And they said that, listen, these people are not poor. Pavement dwellers in Bombay are not abjectly poor. They don't have a home. They can't afford any home in Bombay because Bombay real estate prices are crazy. They're higher than Manhattan. So they can't afford a home, but they earn money. I mean, they earn decent money by, ironing clothes or repairing watches or whatever it is they do, or working as domestic workers. So they said, the city said, okay, they can contribute some money. The city will subsidize and some money, and they would also contribute labor. That is, they'll participate in the building of this home for themselves, right? So it's a great idea, and so on. So the National Slum Dwellers Federation organized a consultation for pavement dwellers with the municipality, and they showed these plans, which is, the tenement would be, the flat would be about half the size of this room, each flat. And in it, there would be a little kitchen, a toilet, and some living area, and then, some loft where you could climb up and go to sleep, right? So you could fit in children in a loft. Instead of a bunk bed, it's a little loft. Neat little flat, well designed. And so they said, this is what you're going to be living in. And the deal is you contribute some money, you contribute some labor, and we'll get this done and we'll conform to the Supreme Court's orders. So when they listened to this, all the men said, oh, wonderful, this is great, perfect. All the women said, this won't work. So the municipal officer said, what do you mean this won't work? The women are saying it won't work. Every woman is saying this won't work, and the men are saying this is great, this is perfect, this is wonderful. And so the municipal officers couldn't believe, why are these women saying it won't work? So the women said, well, have you thought about it? They said, what do you mean thought about it? Here it is, we've found some land for you. It's right here in the middle of the city, and we've got a scheme where you're getting a handsome subsidy from the city corporation, and you guys are saying that this won't work. The women said, listen, you don't understand our husbands. We know our husbands. So they said, what do you mean you know your husbands? He said, listen, we have come from outside Bombay. When we came to the city, our husband said, oh, we'll make money in Bombay. This is a city where we can earn money, we can save up the money, and once we've saved up the money, enough money, we will go back to where we came from and buy land and go back to our original occupation, which is farming. It's just that we don't have any land and we don't have the money to buy the land, and we came to Bombay to make the money to buy the land. This is what these husbands of ours have been dreaming of. And so you give them this flat, then along will come somebody employed in an insurance company, a bank, in a supermarket, in an airline, and say, we'll give you very good money, please sell us this flat. And they will sell the flat, and the money would be gone in no time, in drink and gambling or whatever it is, and we'll be back on the pavement. So they said, well, what? So then the municipal officer said, yeah, but that could happen. But so what do we do about this? The women said, listen, we've been living under conditions where we've had no access to any toilet. We've been finding some way, to, some makeshift arrangement for a toilet. Now, what we tell you is, you take the toilet out of the house, inside the flat. That will give us more room in the flat. Then build 5 toilets for every 5 flats. 1 toilet for every 5 flats outside. Right? So 5 families will use 1 toilet that's located outside the flat. There's no toilet in the flat, inside the flat. And once you do that, we are fine with it because we are people who lived with no toilets. And sharing a toilet with 5 other families is no problem for us because we share space with hundreds of people. But if you do this, then the dainty ladies married to executives in banks and insurance companies will not want to buy a flat that doesn't have a toilet, and the flat will remain with us. If you put the toilet in the flat, it becomes a nice self-contained unit, and middle-class people who have the cash will offer the money, and husbands would be tempted, it will get sold. You do it like this, and that way we'll live in the flat, we'll not have to go back to the pavement, and we'll all be happy. And that's what the municipality did. Now, this is the advantage of consulting. Now, who could have thought of this? None of the men could think of this eventuality. And actually, in many of the slum relocation schemes, this is exactly what has happened. That the flat is allotted to a slum dweller because they have been slum dwellers, they've been entitled to the flat, and then somebody else comes along, a university lecturer with a higher salary comes along, his family needs a little flat, they offer the money to this person, they the same thing happens with respect to, on policies. I mean, for instance, in Tanzania, they decided that all these people selling rugs and buckets and all kinds of things on the streets in Dar es Salaam, that will create for them a market space with stalls, so they can store their stuff there and open the shop in the morning, close it in the evening, and this is a designated locality for these people to sell their goods. They could be, dresses, rugs, buckets, chicken, anything. So they did this and moved them out from the wayside pavement to these stalls. And next thing they found is that all of them had sold their shacks to companies that were selling watches, clocks, and higher value items, right? And you ask them, why did you do this? They said, listen, the people who buy from us are not going to this particular location. Our customers are people who have very little time. They are poor people. And so it's only when they are going from work and coming back from work, they can stop by and pick a bucket or pick a toy for their child on the road. They're not going to come to this market shack and buy a toy for their child. And that's what we sell. We sell such things. And there are no customers in this place. Now we get a good rent. We've rented it out to this person who's selling the watch and selling the clocks and selling, silks, and we are back to doing what we were doing, right? So you see, the thing is, and if you don't talk to people, you don't understand, you will not get your policies right. And the difficult thing is this. I mean, when I was in Cambridge, have any of you been to Cambridge in England? Charming place. There's an area in Cambridge called the Kite. The Kite was a locality which had some exotic restaurants and, handicraft sort of shops and so on. It was very ethnic, the Kite area. And so you had, some guy from California who came and made great coffee. And the secret of his coffee was the water. He managed to find he managed to collect rainwater in Cambridge and then put it through a filter and make coffee with it. And that coffee tasted very different from any other coffee. So these were the things. And so there was a lot of public protest when the city decided they will redevelop the Kite area and have, malls that sell Prada and Gucci and such things, a nice fancy shopping area, because this is a bit run down, the Kite. And people in Cambridge had a lot of affection for the Kite. I mean, it's a part of the charm and character of the city. And so they were very unhappy with this development. Then the Cambridge City Council announced that there will be a public consultation. And so many of us who cared about the Kite remaining the way it is, Oh, said, oh, good, public consultation, so we'll go there. So we went to this place where the public consultation was announced. And it was a room in the Cambridgeshire City Council, right? But when all of us caring about the kite got there, it was packed. The room was full. And who was it full with? It was full with all the officials of the Cambridgeshire Council and, people who, and those who wanted the kite area to be developed because, these were the future mall owners and shopkeepers. They already packed it, right? So for the record, public consultation was held on such and such a date at such and such a venue, it was decided by acclamation. That's a lovely word. By acclamation, the proposal was endorsed by the public, right? And the relevant public couldn't get into the room. So these are tricks that bureaucrats play. So genuine public consultation is not easy, because it's messy. Not everybody in the public would agree. How do you then get a consensus? What the hell? What do they know anyway? They haven't thought through the problem. They're not thinking of, So there's a kind of dismissal of public in the making of public policy in all countries, yeah?
Why do you think it is that they consult the public after the policy is in place rather than before? Like you were saying with the trains, they started the trains and then spoke to people, but
Yes.
why do they not speak to the people beforehand? You'd think as a business person as well, it'd be more efficient for them to start well.
Yeah, but you see, it depends on what it is. If you can reverse, if you start and then you evaluate public reaction, public receptivity, and you find they don't like it, you should be able to restore the status quo ante. But if you've made a policy decision that has changed the environment so that you cannot go back and restore, you see, for a train you can change its timing. Right? The train's been running anyway, but you can change the timing. But if you build a mall in the kite area, you're not going to get back this crazy California coffee maker to be able to come back. The deed is done, right? So very often you got to consult the public before, because if you do it, afterwards you can do an evaluation, and you may find that things are not working well and so on, and then you may wish to correct. So that's part of the policy cycle. You're meant to evaluate the efficacy of a policy, and that's another very difficult area. That's where we in our public policy school, we try to teach students different techniques of evaluating the efficacy of a policy. How do you know that something works or doesn't work? But you have to do it, and you have to change or correct the policy to the extent that it can be changed or corrected depending on the evaluation, right? And the evaluation is not easy. For us, one common thing for instance, one technique that people use is called randomized control trials. Now, this is actually something that the pharmaceutical industry comes up with. Before you introduce a drug, and start selling it, you do a trial as to seeing whether the drug works, right? So suppose you say, I have a drug that's going to bring down glucose sugar levels in people. It will control diabetes more effectively. So the way the pharmaceutical company will test it is to take a group of people who have a similar age and profile and call it the treatment group, and they'll pick them at random, so it's not the same family and so on. And then you'll have another group which is called the control group, which is similar to this group, also picked randomly, to whom you give what is called a placebo. So because psychology in people makes a big difference. I mean, if you think this is a medicine, even if it is, chalk, you may think it's working, right? So you give a placebo to one lot and you give the actual drug to another lot, but they don't know whether they're getting the actual drug or the placebo. And then after some time, you then measure their glucose levels in the two groups. And if for this randomized population, the sugar levels are consistently lower for the lot that was taking the medicine, you understand that this medicine works. And it's no such change in sugar levels in the other group. So this is one way by which you test the efficacy of a policy. Now this is difficult to do. I mean, it's expensive. So if you want, people think, okay, we've had many experiments in India with this kind of a thing. How do you encourage mothers to bring their child for immunization, right? You see, that requires a certain discipline. You have to take a child at least 3 times for you to complete the course of immunization for certain communicable diseases, smallpox, diphtheria, measles, and so on. Often parents do it once and then they don't care about giving the child a booster dose. So the experiment was a randomized controlled trial in Rajasthan, said that, you give a utensil, a cooking utensil to the family and say, you get this if you bring your child for immunization. And you did this with a randomized control trial. A population group did not get the utensil. Another group got the utensil. And then you found that the ones that got it actually did bring that child for immunization, because this was an incentive. It was something they wanted this utensil. It was sort of... the other lot didn't care. They just behaved as they always did. So you then know that if you can give some incentives as a policy, this is a good policy to adopt because it works. Now, well, we know it worked in that context, but we don't really know, can't be 100% sure it will work everywhere with other groups and so on. See, the difficulty in the end with public policy is that we are dealing with people. And people are very unpredictable, actually. In fact, if you think about it, your sense of freedom depends on your unpredictability. Because if I could tell whether you put your hand under your chin or whether you'll move it, if I could predict it, you'd be a robot, right? It's because I cannot predict that. What you will do is inherent to your sense of freedom. Otherwise, you'll be an automaton. You'll be determined and deterministically, judged by others. So we behave like that. And so the thing is, any theory we form about human beings and their behavior is always vulnerable to being contradicted or in fact being affirmed. You cannot tell what will happen. So all of the disciplines, like the big problem is with economics. Economics is a discipline that tries to make predictions, right? Reduce the price, demand will increase, that sort of thing. And it goes to very sophisticated extent to, drawing up models of the economy and its behavior. But you see, it's not like physics. For instance, if you worked out the orbit of the heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the Mars, and so on, you whatever theory you project about why they move in the way they do, they will still move in the way they do, regardless of your theory. Whereas, if you predicted something about how human beings would behave, how the stock market would behave, or how business would behave, or how will the farmer behave, depending on some policy change, you cannot assume that behavior will be the same as, because the knowledge that you made this prediction will change the behavior, right? In other words, what you are studying, an observation itself will influence what you are studying. So you are not studying the same thing, right? I mean, it's a philosophical paradox. I mean, that the saying is that you can't cross the same river twice. Why can't you cross the same river twice? Technically, you don't have the same water molecules. The river is flowing. So when you cross the river once, you have one set of molecules and water. And then when you cross the river again, in the same place, it's another set of molecules and water. So you can't cross. So it's like that. Human beings are like that. So, either you say, okay, the stock market will rise, says some pundit, who's regarded as a top economist. And it may well be that the stock market rises because he said so. Or it may well be that people may think, what I should do is not, is to wait it out. Because if the stock market is going to rise and I don't sell today and I wait till later, I'll get a higher price. So that's the problem. So it's always difficult to anticipate what people will say or do, but it's a good idea to consult and to talk to people. So one of the important parts of public policy is this evaluation after you've implemented the policy to see how it works. And there are many techniques of doing the evaluation. One common one is to say what happened before, what happened after, right? So before and after, and then you can look at another place where there was no policy, and you look at before and after there, and then you see the difference in difference, right? Because other factors would be affecting commonly. So difference in difference is a technique. Randomized control trials are a technique of evaluating, to as objectively as we can. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is, when you're dealing with people, you cannot be arrogant and think that you've got the answers, because human beings are inherently unpredictable, and therefore part of the difficulty is, like for instance, the 2008 crash in the financial markets arose from arrogance and hubris on the part of advisors to the financial institutions, that they had found a very good way, and in fact 2 of them got a Nobel Prize in economics, and they encouraged Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers to increase the number of derivatives that they were dealing with. Do you know what a derivative is? If it happened like this, the crash, banks decided that they will encourage people to buy homes and give them loans to buy homes. And for a banker, the more you lend, the bigger your business is going to be, because you're in the business of making loans. So you'll get a promotion, you'll get a bonus, you'll get a salary hike if you made more loans. So you try and go to the public and say, borrow money from this bank, we'll give it to you at such and such an interest, and you can buy this house, right? So what they did was they increased the lending to the public to buy homes on the assumption that, house prices will hold up. Then they began to feel that, oh no, this is a bit of a risk, because what if somebody is not able to repay the loan, but meanwhile the value of the house in the market has collapsed. So then the bank, which can take the house, which is the collateral, will not get the money back. So they thought, one way to cover this risk is to have more people, spread the risk. So you sell the loan as a derivative to another person. So that person is buying that loan, right? So that person is willing to take the risk. So that's a derivative. You've derived from one instrument another instrument, and you can have derivatives on derivatives. You see, you have insurance and reinsurance and reinsurance and reinsurance. So you're spreading the risk. So these economists said, is a very good way of, you're spreading the risk, you can increase your portfolio, you can increase your lending and so on. And in the end, if your original loan is an ill thought out loan, a bad loan, the fact that you multiplied, spread the risk with others through derivatives is not going to change the fact that that loan was a bad loan. And that's exactly what happened. Junk bonds turned out to be junk bonds. Otherwise, it looked very good because, there are other buyers. There's a demand for that instrument. And therefore, you think, the stock market is rising. We are all, on a prosperity track, and so on. And it got built up like that. And then the thing crashed. Right? So now these economists who produced these algorithms and made these predictions about how derivatives and multiplication of derivatives will increase prosperity were downright wrong, right? But they said, we are very scientific, we are using a lot of data, we are coming to our conclusions on the basis of very sophisticated analysis, and we've got PhDs from MIT and Harvard, and we are consultants to Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs. We are the cat's whiskers. We've sussed out the market, and they all went wrong. And Lehman Brothers folded up completely, went bankrupt, and it's no longer in business. So it's difficult to tell, when you're dealing with people, that you can't have these assumptions that I know it or we know it. We've got to experiment in public policy. You've got to try it out. So one of the difficulties for India is that India has not learnt how to experiment. When it starts a policy, it says, okay, it will run the policy for the whole country. Now, China is very different. In China, they will start a policy but limit it to a small place and wait and watch and see how it works. Deng Xiaoping said that you cross the river by feeling the pebbles under your foot. So you're sort of placing your foot on, so you're not going to sink. You're going to gingerly, experimentally go across the river. That's his analogy of crossing the river by feeling the pebbles under your feet. And so China does it like that. So China, for instance, does direct elections for local government, but not throughout the country. They do it in a few provinces because they want to see what will happen, because they are concerned that the authority of the party should not be damaged by having elections. That the principle that the Communist Party of China is the most important institution and will remain the most important institution should not be affected. Let's experimentally have local government elections, open it up to whoever wants to contest, and then see if the people who get elected are, people who would continue to be loyal to this system of the Communist Party or not, right? That's an experiment. Or you experiment with opening up the coastal areas for international trade and business by reducing taxes and so on, and see if that works, right? So with the result, you see China has got all its development in the coastal areas. Its interior is not doing so well. But nonetheless, when they make policy, they don't say this policy will be enforced throughout China. There are policies that it will enforce throughout China, which is censorship of the internet, banning of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. That's enforced throughout China. But economic policies to create jobs, policies to promote healthcare, policies to take care of the old age people, policies for education, all of these are done experimentally. And if it works and they get good results, then they spread it, they increase it, but they never announce it for the whole country. One of the difficulties in India has been that we know all our major welfare policies of employment guarantee or giving subsidized food for people is all India, everywhere. And often they don't work very well. They create a lot of corruption and leakages and so on. So the other major problem in India is that who makes policies, right? Now, I said that consulting people is a rare thing. That doesn't happen. But consulting anyone outside the government also doesn't happen in India. Those who are working for the government, see, India is like UK, which has a permanent civil service. And you must have all seen a Yes Minister, the Yes Minister is a very realistic documentary it's of course there are imaginary episodes, but it's realistic. It shows the power that the civil servant has over the minister, right? The minister has to get re-elected, is in touch with the people, wants to do things that he thinks will be popular with the people and so on. And the civil servants continually stymie and prevent the minister from doing what the minister wants. That's what the whole thing is about. So the stranglehold of the bureaucracy in governments that have inherited a permanent civil service from the UK is very strong. I don't know how it is in Australia. Australia is more of a federation, and so there are more variations in Tasmania and in the north and in Victoria and different places. The political culture and the styles of government are somewhat different. But in a somewhat unitary country like India, where we are federal in theory but unitary in the practice of government, the bureaucracy, so we have, and the bureaucrats in India are generalists, they are not specialists. So we have, for instance, in the defense ministry, somebody whose education might be in medieval history and very brilliant in medieval history, scores very high in the competitive exam, gets selected to be a member of the Indian Administrative Service and gets posted when he's about 50 years old as the secretary in charge of the Ministry of Defense. Now this person would not know why, the front end of a tank from its rear, will not know anything at all about what the needs of the military are, but he's the person who will make policy decisions on whether the Indian Army should have more tanks or whether it should have more aircraft or whether it should have more ships, right? So we have a problem in that it's the generalists they are a kind of a closed shop, because today this person would be in charge of the defense ministry. 2 years later, the person may be made in charge of the finance ministry, in which case in the finance ministry he's an expert on taxation. In the defense ministry he's an expert on buying defense equipment. In the housing ministry he's an expert on how to expand housing services, or in the education ministry or the health ministry. The same person can be in all of these ministries and supposedly making policy. And this is a big problem in this country, that we have to open up the government. And it's possible because the same person could say, listen, I don't know anything about defense needs, but I'm part of the policy making group. I'm going to consult people who know something about the subject, and I will ask them to give a report, to give a justification as to why you do this and not the other. Now that kind of openness is good, and that's where I think we hope that in India policymakers will consult universities, research institutions, where people have thought about the problem, have looked at solutions to the problem, have done some evaluations, know what works, doesn't work, consult them, and then make policies. But very often, so for instance, research institutions in India, if you go to them and ask, oh, do you interact with government officers? Do you go to Parliament, to the Select Committee and give evidence? Their answer, and it's a true answer, the answer would be, we don't bother to do that because our government is knowledge proof, right? So, and unfortunately that's true because, and I say this because, it's a kind of psychological thing in senior officers. The Indian civil service, right? So India is the first country in the British Empire that began having examinations to recruit officers to work with the government. In England, you didn't have examinations, and you didn't say. The original system of having examinations to select civil servants was from China, which is why bureaucrats are called mandarins in English. They're called mandarins because China instituted a system of examinations, and the Chinese examination system was phenomenally rigorous. It went on for days, 2-3 days. The candidates had to write essays on Confucius and philosophy and how to build bridges and how to, graft plants, things like that. And then they got selected. So in India, the British decided to institute an examination system for the Indian civil service. And the examination was a little bit of Persian, because at that time, Persian was the official language of India, because all the Mughals, the previous rulers, used Persian. And so you had to know a little Persian, you had to know a little Sanskrit, and you had to know a bit of geography and so on. And you did these exams and you got through, and you were about 21, 22 years old. They were sent out to come and rule India. Now, these characters went to Oxford or Cambridge colleges for, a year to prepare themselves, to learn Persian and Sanskrit. And the college that was very popular and which started this system of training people for the civil service exam was Balliol College in Oxford. So Balliol is known as the black man's college because later on Indians also joined. They were allowed to take this exam. Now Balliol College had a master called Benjamin Jowett, who was the head of the college, and he opened up the college to give lessons in the civil service exams. And there's a limerick in that college about Jowett, which goes something like, my name is Benjamin Jowett. I am the master of this college. And the next line is, and what I don't know isn't knowledge. Now, unfortunately, the Indian administrative officer today thinks that what he doesn't know isn't knowledge, not worth knowing. And this is a long period of arrogance in decision-making people in government. And we are struggling to break this, right? To say, no, and the only way you do that is to have more evaluations, more criticisms, more analysis of policies, because you're ruled by a group of people who advise the politicians, but our politicians, I have more time for Indian politicians. See, they have to go and, get dust on their feet and ask for votes and get elected, right? The permanent civil service doesn't have to do that. And these politicians are of the people, so they're not highly educated people. So they don't know the constitution and the laws and so on. It's the civil servant who knows all that. So it's the civil servant who sets up the politician to find ways of getting around the law, to get corrupt, and so on. So, the minister is tutored by corrupt civil servants in this country. And the ministers, of course, fine, that's, if I'm not going to be in trouble, I'm not going to land up in jail. Unfortunately, in the end, some ministers do land up in jail in this country. We've got one now in Bihar, a very charismatic, colorful minister called Lalu Yadav. He's in jail. But civil servants, no, they get away with it, right? So we have a problem with our system of governance. It's not like the United States. You see, in the United States, every time the administration changes, a whole lot of people come into the policy making thing, whether it is at the city level or at the level of the state or the federal government. Whenever an elected administration changes, new people are brought in. And so that is why public policy as a field of study is very advanced in the United States, because even if I'm a doctor, I will still go and do a degree in public policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard, although my profession is as a doctor, because I think that someday I may be called upon to be the Surgeon General of the United States of America, in which case my knowledge of how government works, how the Congress works, the Constitution of the United States is going to stand me in good stead. So whether I'm an engineer, doctor, psychologist, whatever, a degree in public policy is valued by top professionals in the United States because they get a chance to be involved in policy making. In the British colonial system, outsiders don't get much of a look in making policy. And therefore, it's a struggle for us. So I'm dean of a public policy school. I train my students in being able to identify problems, in able to design a program, evaluate the program. They have all these skills, but unless they get into government, or unless the government is more open and says, okay, we'll employ you as a consultant, as an advisor, we'll make use of your knowledge, we are not going to make much of a change. So that's why I circulated the article that Rajkumar wrote, which identifies these problems. The quality of public policy making in this country could be vastly improved if only policymakers could be encouraged to consult people and then to make use of expert knowledge that our research institutions and our universities are producing, but still a long way to go. So that's what I had to say to you. Thanks. So is it all right? Are you guys learning something? Are you, Huh? So will you come back to India? Yeah, it's I had to say though, I was so delighted that you heard Michael Kirby? Yeah, he came, and I first met Michael Kirby in 1988. I was a program officer in the Ford Foundation, and I had the idea that we should organize a conference for judges on how to use international law when they make decisions in cases, right? Because generally, international law is not used. You don't cite as authority international law. You cite domestic legislation. So I had this idea and then decided we'll have this conference of judges and invited Michael Kirby. He was then a member of the Law Commission. He was not a judge at that time. To that conference in 1988, and I decided to hold it in Bangalore for the simple reason it's my hometown. And since I'm the program officer and I'm in charge of making the grant, and so I'm holding the purse strings, I could decide where it would be held. And I decided I'll hold it in Bangalore because I know people there and they could help me with organizing this conference. And so we had this in 1988 in Bangalore. The Chief Justice of India presided. Michael Kirby was a very active participant. We had a woman called Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's a judge of the Supreme Court now. At that time, she was in the Federal Circuit in Washington. So we had this wonderful meeting and drafted what are called the Bangalore Principles on the domestic application of international human rights norms, right? And so that's when I met Michael Kirby. So it was so wonderful to see him again after all those years here. It was really good. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.